Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. This is Jamie Gray. This pod, we're fortunate enough, and we get to welcome World Rugby's Chief Marketing Officer, Marissa Pace. Marissa played university rugby here in Canada. She's currently World Rugby's Chief Marketing Officer, as I said, and she formerly worked for F1, NFL, NASCAR, and the PGA. It's a really interesting conversation and one that you'll definitely want to hear. Just to mention, I've been doing this the last few pods. If you're a first-time listener, welcome, appreciate it, and definitely appreciate everybody else that listens. This is not for me. This is for Canadian rugby aficionados, people that are in the game, people that are playing, retired, current, past, coaches, administration, and I would just like to give a chance to highlight these different incredible Canadians and what they're doing for rugby in Canada and around the globe. It's a chance to let these people share their story, let us know their origin, how they got to where they are, and I guess to kind of form pathways so that other people can see what is available for them to move forward as well. Oftentimes we do a little rugby news, which we'll get to here shortly. Sometimes there's a gray area, which is something maybe that's controversial happening in the world of rugby right now. But all in all, I really hope that you enjoy listening to these pods, that you come back and that you share this to some of your friends. How do you share? How do you do that? What do you do? Well, quite simply, we're all over the social media. You can start originally by going on Twitter, which was, I think, the first social media account I started, and it's at Canadian Ruck. Instagram was _Canadian_Ruck. Facebook at the Canadian Ruck. And our email is the CanadianRuck@gmail.com. So all the pods get posted on those social media sites. A little promo, sometimes some stuff that's happening in rugby, I'll pop up there as well. If you want to contact me, if you want to offer some thoughts, or if you just want to have a rugby conversation, send me some private messages, send me an email. I'm really happy and chat quite a lot with anybody that wants to chat rugby. You want to know where we are? Well, we're on YouTube, so watch us, follow, subscribe. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. Listen, follow, subscribe. But beyond that, share these messages, get other people to subscribe, because the more people that listen, the better it is for our Canadian rugby people, so that other people know what's going on, what's available for them. We're online too. Our website is thecanadianruck.weebly.com. Everything is linked there. It's got some information about the pod, about me. Sometimes we have merch, but we're all sold out of our toques, hats, and hoodies right now, but more can be ordered if you are interested. But all that stuff is there. Take a look. So getting through all that, let's take a look at what's happening in the rugby world. And it's been an interesting week or so. Let's start off with the local/international. Marissa and I talk about this, but she and I chatted a few weeks ago. So lots of energy in her voice and lots of, I guess, hopeful intent. But as you're all aware, World Rugby has recommended that the Women's Rugby World Cup, which was to be held in New Zealand this summer, is actually postponed until 2022. If you're not too familiar with it, it is just a recommendation. It hasn't been set in stone yet, but today's March 5th as I do this intro, and there's going to be a vote on March 8 and 9 by the Rugby World Cup Board and the World Rugby Executive Committee to ratify this recommendation. So there's a chance it might still happen, but I think most people are leaning towards that it's not going to happen. The host nation, New Zealand, is not sure that this is the best time, given how large the Rugby World Cup is, faced against COVID. New Zealand Rugby isn't sure how well they can run this important rugby event while looking out for the safety of their teams and their country. And if your head's buried in the sand or you're stuck in COVID mode, just over the last 24 hours, New Zealand, the South Island, was rocked with a 8-point-something magnitude earthquake and had tsunami warnings. So they're battling some of their own demons down there, let alone COVID. They're battling Mother Nature as well. So they've got a lot that they're up against at the moment. So prayers and thoughts are going out with everybody in the South Island. I've got friends on the North Island. They say they're fine. They keep getting alarms for tsunami warnings, but they feel like they're pretty confident and pretty safe. As far as we're concerned about the Rugby World Cup, Alan Gilpan, who's World Rugby's interim chief executive, stated, this is a quote from him, "Rugby World Cup 2021 is the pinnacle of women's rugby. We're committed to providing the best conditions for the players and teams to prepare fully and to compete at the best in the tournament. Postponing the tournament to next year provides the best opportunity to do that. Putting it simply, due to the ongoing challenges of the pandemic, it's too difficult to guarantee adequate preparation time for all teams in advance of their arrival in New Zealand and during their time in New Zealand. Rugby Canada's Tim Powers followed up that with his statement. I can only imagine they're disappointed. He's speaking of the women's team. Look, they're all very smart, capable people. They'll understand the world in which we live. But it's hard to have something that for many is a career moment stripped away and we have a good team. So I can't imagine they're anything but disappointed. We're disappointed for them and hope we can get things back to normal soon. It's a heartbreaking decision. It's a disappointing decision. Sadly, in COVID, we've all become accustomed to these sorts of outcomes. Well said, Tim. And my heart breaks for those girls. My hat goes off to them. I know how hard you're prepping, but we're hopeful. Yeah, hey, within a few days, maybe they're going to say, let's go forward. But if not, you need to be prepared. So to me, reading about this is like many other things and shown how terrible things have happened during COVID. BC, so before COVID, this would not have been an issue and the games would have been moving forward. But player, and not to mention coaches, admin, fans, etc., their safety is the utmost importance. As I said, my heart breaks for the women's team as they've been doing their best to prep for their cup. So if it is postponed, girls, 2022, you're going to be champing up the bit to to really put Rugby Canada on the forefront and do well at those games. Sevens World Series, more Canadian international rugby mixed together. As of now, the Vancouver Sevens is scheduled for the fall. Rugby Canada is pretty adamant that it's still going to happen with many details to finalize. Here in New Brunswick, I just read today that they're hoping that everybody by the start or mid-summer is going to have their first shot of the vaccination. So hopefully Vancouver is doing well on that end as well. Unfortunately, the Langford, BC event is now being pushed to 2022. And the other, still in the international, Six Nations, as we all know, was off this weekend. I got a little excited. I pre-posted some images about Six Nations this weekend, and I forgot to check the date, but it's not this weekend. It is next. So they get some time off, gives France a chance to make sure everybody's fully healed, and we're going to get to that too in a moment. Stating that, though, there is a full slate of Super Rugby matches. Super Rugby Aotearoa, Chiefs and Highlanders already happened. And I was pulling for the Highlanders, and they actually got through. They won that game. I think it was by a pretty decent score. I know Aaron Smith didn't start. They had young nine Falau Fakatava. He played brilliantly off the bench last week, and they were going to start him again. But anytime you get Aaron Smith ready to come on, it's amazing. He just re-upped to stay in New Zealand for the next 2 years to take them through to the 2023 World Cup. He said he's content with the decision. His workload needs to be managed a little bit better, as he needs to make sure he's looking after his body over the next couple of years to prep for that next World Cup. Coming up soon again is the Crusaders Hurricanes. I'm a Crusaders fan. Hate me if you want. They might be sliding back a little bit, but they're still stacked, and I'm still going to be backing them. Super Rugby AU, Western Force beat Waratahs in the first match. And I was pulling for the Taz. I'm a Michael Hooper fan. And coming up within the next 24 hours is the Brumbies and Rebels. Close one, I think, but I believe the Brumbies are going to pull this one out. Sticking with some more purely international, COVID shaming. Fabien Galthy, France's Six Nation coach, has COVID and has been publicly shamed for putting his team at risk. And I think we're probably all aware of this. As you know, Galthy and 11 players tested positive for COVID after their win over Ireland. Reports have stated that Galthy left his team's celebration and training bubble to watch his son's rugby match. And this is true. He did. He wanted to go watch his boy play, and he went. Now, I'm no medical expert, and COVID restrictions are different in various parts of the world. I know here where I am, my son and I went out today, went to a hat store, and he bought a new hat. And we went to an old tech store, and I bought some retro video games for a Nintendo. I know a lot of places around the world, you can't do that. You can't make those little journeys. Here you can. So COVID restrictions are different. From the reports that have been gathered, there's been lots of rumor mongering and online shaming going on. Lots of people on social media, the news, podcasts, publicly shaming Galthy for his actions. And this, in my opinion, has been terrible. Public shaming often leads people to not taking symptoms seriously. I hate talking COVID, but enough is enough. Man made a mistake. he's actually cleared, and Roger Salomon, the head of FFR's medical committee, actually stated in my report, I mentioned it at the start, it is perfectly clear that what he has done, and whatever one might think, he had the right to do what he did. And there was no particular risk. He went on to actually state that he was always wearing a mask and didn't break any rules. So FFR cleared him. They say he followed guidelines. So I think people need to back off this guy. And maybe before we post hateful thoughts about people online and do some COVID shaming, maybe we need to wait till we get all the facts before that happens. Bottom line, there are different COVID regulations in different parts of the world. French rugby cleared him. Let's move on. And lastly, this is something I loved, and this is something I truly love about rugby. Alan Wynne Jones, what a classy guy. After winning the Triple Crowns, Jones was photographed cleaning up the pitch with the ground crew. I saw this, I was like, wow, just what a guy. Talk about a throwback, displaying some of those important virtues that make the game of rugby so great. Some of the virtues that make rugby a truly unique sport. Jones impressed not only with his on-field play, but his willingness to clean the sheds, so to speak. Hats off to you, Jones. Truly, truly a classy gentleman. Coming up now, Marissa Pace. All right, so welcome back. We're fortunate enough we have Marissa Pace on with us today, and Marissa works for World Rugby as the Chief Marketing Officer. And we're bringing Marissa's story to you because she's Canadian, and it's very exciting to have you here, Marissa. Welcome for joining us.
Thanks, Jamie. It's really, really great to be here.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. When I was reading your bio, I was like, this is amazing. So born and raised in rural Quebec, just outside of Montreal, played rugby in university. You love to fly fish. You're a beekeeper. You worked in F1. You worked with NFL. You worked in the NASCAR. You worked in PGA, just all over the place in some really amazing high-end events in sports. And now you're the Chief Marketing Officer for World Rugby. How does this happen? Like, how did you get to where you are? What were those steps? It just blows my mind. Like, just talk to us about those steps.
Well, it really depends if you believe in luck or if you believe in making things happen. And I believe in a bit of both. To be honest, I've been very lucky, but I've also made things happen to myself. I love that you're drinking a Tim Hortons coffee. You're killing me.
Sorry.
I started off, there were two sports in my life when I was growing up that were big passions of mine. And that was rugby and that was Formula One. So I followed my dream to both, and it was almost lucky that I was part of it all. I started up with a group of young girls in high school. We had some exchange students from Australia come over, and they essentially made our men's or boys rugby team win every championship that existed. And it became the envy of the school who played rugby, and there was no girls team. So a group of girls petitioned the school to start up the girls rugby team. And they found a university student from across the way from Bishop's University to come coach the girls high school team, who is now actually, ironically, he ended up being the 15s women's coach and also the 7 women's coach for Canada. Cool. So we were his first team. We got our team started, played rugby and just followed that passion. I ended up in Formula One because that was a drive for motorsport. That was my first play in sports, but got there in the end.
So you've bounced around a little bit, but what was your final? It sounds like rugby and F1, they were your favorite sports. What ended up drawing you to the World Rugby in the position you're in now? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was head of digital and head of marketing in Formula One. I worked in Formula One for 10 years, whether it was through supplier, through TV, or directly for Formula One management, working for Mr. Eccleston. And when I left that, I left from London back to Canada, started up my own consulting firm. And it worked out that this, the demographic that Formula One was trying to change from sort of the older male crowd over to the younger female, more active crowd was something that rugby was very similarly trying to get into. And so there was a huge synergy there. So they gave me a call and I went through the interview process, and lucky for me, I was successful.
That's pretty neat. So with all that, like, you've obviously got an athletic mindset. You love the outdoors. You love being active. How does that help you with your role at World Rugby? I mean, you obviously got a playing background, but what are those working at F1 and NFL and all those places, how does that help you in your role today?
Yeah, I think what's important is always, it looks like from an international federation perspective, and we were guilty of this in Formula One as well, it's very much about the international, usually men's game that gets sort of the forefront of the stage, Rugby World Cup 2019. My background gives me a little bit of perspective into the community game and how it all started, because I came through the system myself, especially on the women's side. Canada's very lucky. We have a very robust women's program from years ago, because this was the 90s, not to date myself. But yeah, so it gives me that perspective and
You're
that
still younger than
drive
me,
to,
I think.
oh,
I
happy
imagine.
days, younger than someone.
You're doing some like award-winning work with World Rugby. I have something down here: Rugby World social and digital platforms, and a complete overhaul of the broadcast and content strategy for the World Rugby HSBC 7 series. And the 7 series over the last few years has really taken off. What is it that you're doing there to help those 7 series become so prominent in the eyes of rugby fans?
Yeah, the 7 series is such a labor of love for all of us, because it's really where we feel like the sport has the best chance for getting through to younger generations, to female audiences, because it's fast, it's exciting, it's entertaining. The crowd is great. There's something for everyone in it, and it's not hard to understand. Rugby 15s is a bit more challenging to understand. Sevens is quite easy. So we decided as a company to overhaul both the broadcast, the graphics packages, but the whole presentation format of it. And we were well on our way. We had really changed a lot, and we're in the process of changing even more, even just formats, and doing lots of consultations with the unions. But coronavirus got in the way, and now we've got, we're backed up a year and a half of basically of sevens programs, with the Olympics to still look forward to. But it is something that we're still working on overhauling and changing up.
Yes, there's a lot of motion, a lot in motion there. The Olympics coming up, the Women's World Cup is coming up, things like that, and you must be on your toes nonstop trying to push things out and stay ahead of the curve. Um, Globally, there's a global panel. Talk to us about the global panel that informs, I guess, the information of content that is offered out on rugby. In Canada, we get information. Not everything's always accessible, but what are you doing there to help make sure those things get out to all the nations and filter down to people like me that coach high school and rookie rugby and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's either filtered down or hopefully bubble up. We're working on both sides of that coin, where we're trying to produce content and work with the different unions, the different geographies, to provide them and syndicate that content over to them. We've got the fan panel, which is what you were referring to, which is a group of people that we are using, and we selected from different geographies around the world to inform how we're doing, sort of rate us and give us some advice on what they think is working, what isn't working, just people that know rugby, so that they can help us, evangelize to a wider audience. But also now we're just in the process with the launch of our new strategic plan, which is going to be launching next week. We're in the process of working out how we're going to better serve what we call brand rugby from the community side. So what can we provide to unions to help the smaller unions, the community sport, to thrive and get people to know rugby and what it is and how to play it.
So like the Canadas, or some of the smaller nations per se in the World Rugby scale. Seeing how this pod's not going to go for another month, is there anything that you can tell us now, since it's not going to be leaked information?
Great question. No, I mean, the best part of the strategic plan, I think, is that there's a huge shift from the executive committee level, from the very highest level of who governs World Rugby, down to all the worker bees and everybody, that we are here to promote audience engagement. And we want to make sure that people join rugby because they know what a great sport it is, what it does for the community, and then get new players in the game, which eventually end up being the top men's and women's 15 players, sevens players in the sport. So it's hugely supportive, and it was done with a lot of consultation with all facets of people involved in rugby. So it wasn't just based on men's 15s and that game.
So is your focus or it sounds like it's all over, but if you had a specific focus, is it more 15 sevens, men's, women's, or is it as holistic as possible?
It's as holistic as possible. I say that my job is to make rugby mainstream. So if I can, explain rugby or speak to anybody down the street in almost any country, that they don't look at you in sort of puzzlement. We want rugby on televisions, on apps, on online. We want people to access it. But we also want people to know how and where they can join the game in their country, and particularly in Canada. We have to give ourselves credit, because Canadian rugby it may seem small when you look at the bigger unions and how we performed in certainly the men's World Cup. But we do a great job with our team and the money that's given. And internationally, we're seen as one of the more progressive nations, again, specifically in women as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our women's program, I mean, they're both awesome, but I mean, our women's program, the sevens and 15s are both, I think, ranked third right now. Men's just outside the top 20 on the 15s, and the sevens, I think, is a little bit better. What kind of impact can you have in your role to help these initiatives with rugby? Like, social media plays a part of it. What are some things that you initiate in order to spread the good word of rugby?
Rugby has been, as I mentioned before, it's been particularly a male-dominated sport. Lots of perhaps the older generation, something that maybe your dad played or your grandfather played. My job, again, is to make rugby mainstream, and bringing humor into that is something that's quite new. It's something we tried in the World Cup, worked very well for us. You have to bring the lighter side of it to attract an audience that's beyond the fans that we have currently, and to expose people to what a great sport it is and how funny it can be. And that's really one of the big advancements, and I suppose why we won all the awards from Rugby World Cup 2019. What we're carrying forward is just bringing some humor into it and making it easy to understand.
Plus, you had the Japanese guy that showed up every game in a painted on jersey,
Accent.
which helps, right?
Yes, he did. He was great.
That was awesome.
Yeah, no, we had a lot of fun with him, but that's a testament to the whole team, and that you have to be able to react quickly in the spirit of the moment. So the two agencies that we were using, plus our own in-house team, really used backsend, contacted him, and had some fun with it. We pretended to make little figurines, and people were actually going to the licensing stores and saying, "Where can I get the miniature backsend?" But it was all obviously digital. But it was quite funny.
That's awesome. Yeah, he definitely had a good time there. That's for sure. Women's World Cup's coming up, 2021. New Zealand, knock on wood, has been a very, very safe and COVID friendly country. Are there any concerns moving forward with the World Cup, or is it all systems go and let's get all the teams here quarantined and ready to go in in a few more months?
I think the word is contingency, and that's been my word for the last almost year now, is contingency planning. So if this, then what? I'm glad I did so well in math, because it's all about equations and formulas and figuring out what happens if this happens. So where all systems go. It's funny, my colleagues and I always joke about how, you'd think with the pandemic happening and not a lot of rugby happening in the Northern Hemisphere, we would be less busy, but actually we're even more busy. And what's good is that we're able to throw our resource at the important pinnacle events, such as Rugby World Cup 2021 in New Zealand, as you said, and even 23. We're already planning for France and South Africa 22, and obviously the Olympic Games, and a new women's competition that'll be launching soon.
What's that?
That's a great question. That's one of those secret things that when this podcast comes to air, someone can Google and it will be public. We're looking, it's no secret. We're looking at running a world competition for women's series that's sort of a feeder series into the Rugby World Cup 2021 that would really get the best talent from around the world able to play against itself, instead of, I guess, just games that are organized locally.
So, like, still internationals, or would it be like all-star games, like a Lions tour type thing? Like, what are you envisioning there?
All great ideas, all on the cards, but not just yet. This is more international games where we can really, I guess, have a international competition for women that leads into the Rugby World Cup that that, you know, sets the standard and gets young women and young girls looking at rugby as something aspirational that is actually attainable before you get to the World Cup stage.
That's pretty cool. So something, yeah, I like that. One of the things I've talked on my pod before is I love the Lions tour, but I also hate it at the same time because all of a sudden you've got, you know, all these nations from the UK taking off for a month playing in one nation, and they monopolize everything. All the money goes back. It doesn't get spread out amongst the other nations. And then, you know, if Canada's hosting England per se, when a Lions tour is going on, we're getting a B or maybe even a C England team that comes over. So I've often said, like, why don't we do like a North American style or America's Lions tour where you have Canada, US, Uruguay, Argentina, and we go somewhere or what have you. And I mentioned it about on the women's side, like, could we not do that with the women where there's, you know, a women's Lions version, build up some history over some time. And, you know, some people think, yeah, it's a cool idea. And others, they automatically go, well, the logistics are going to be hard. It's going to be very expensive and there's no tradition built in yet. Is that something that down the road that could happen for the women's game to promote it more? I don't know. Am I just pipe dreaming here?
No, not at all. I mean, 5-10 years ago, you would have been, but now these are the realities. I mean, if you look at the success of world soccer, women's football, as they call it, that's how they got to be where they are, which was very aspirational and thinking of beyond the box. And that's where we're at now. And I'm very pleased to say that I'm part of an executive team at World Rugby that's working on bringing other international federations in rugby together as opposed to having separate conversations, because there's a lot to unite. And I think fragmentation in rugby has probably been our biggest downfall in you know, previous years. And now we're really trying to bring it all together, and we are all on the same page. We're on the same Zoom calls, rather. So we're starting to align, and so those kinds of things will hopefully happen soon.
I wish I had bought stocks in Zoom about a year ago. Would have been awesome.
You and me both.
Yeah, I wouldn't be teaching. I wouldn't be teaching anymore.
Who knew?
What are some of the things you've implemented over your time at World Rugby? And I imagine you've probably come across roadblocks, as you said, not in this context, but you know, it was an old man's game or an old what have you, and it's changing and it needs to change. It needs to get better. What are some things that you've done? Maybe that you've stumbled, you've butted heads with people, but you know, it's been for the betterment of the game.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I butt heads every day, but not in a bad way. It's much more in a productive way. I guess the challenge, first of all, has been rugby has been portrayed as a very B2B communications sport. So it's, you know, international federation speaks to union speaks to fan. We're trying to take the intermediary out, and we're now starting to have a relationship with fans and the audiences ourselves. That's one piece. The second piece, and I was lucky because Rugby World Cup happened in the year that I joined World Rugby, which is that you're using social media and digital as a platform to get attention and get great numbers, you know, billions of views and videos and getting a new audience. Whereas getting the money to get that started and get going with all that was a challenge, but then the proof was in the pudding with Rugby World Cup. And success to me was when I had the older executive committee, board members, council members come up to me and say, I don't know what you're doing, but my grandkids are saying it's fantastic. You know, we're following it all on social media and they're loving it. So good job, keep going. And that took some time to get everybody used to taking the risks that we were taking, because we did take a lot of risks in terms of content and what we were putting out there, which was less traditional, let's say. So yeah, and just fostering the teams. Now I've got a marketing team for the first time in World Rugby's history, which is focused solely on engaging audiences as opposed to communicating just with the unions.
Yeah, the engagement aspect's key. I think that's great. Walk us through a typical day, Marissa. Like, what time is it there now? 8 a.m., as you say?
Now I'm on my computer's on Dublin time, so I have to look at a different phone. It's 10:30 a.m. here now.
You haven't left for work yet?
Well, see, so I work Dublin hours.
Okay.
So my work will start in a few hours time on the Dublin side. So I'll top and tail my days. It's very confusing. I usually start work around 3 p.m., work until about midnight or 1 a.m., and then get up for the either the New York or the American calls with sponsors and partners. I was on my first call this morning at 6 a.m. and I think I went to bed around midnight. It's, you know, this coronavirus has changed everybody's working habits. And the best thing about World Rugby and something for businesses to take on is the realization and the acceptance that you're measured on deliverables. You're not measured on working hours. Mm-hmm. So whether I work 5 hours in a day or 15 hours in a day, as long as I'm delivering what I need to deliver, it doesn't matter. And that's my philosophy with my team as well.
So how many do you have on your team?
We are now, I think we've just grown a bit and we're hiring a couple more. I think we're at 12 now.
Almost a full 15 squad.
I hope our finance director isn't listening, because he always gives me heck saying I'm trying to take over the world and empire build. But actually, for a sport our size, it's a very, that includes broadcast design, marketing. It's small. It's very small. If you compare us to FIFA, UEFA, any of the big guys, even team level, we're very small. So we're very lean.
Okay, so you get up, you go through your day, and it's, you know, random hours, but it's what works for you and it's what works for your job. You're on Dublin time. Where is your team? Are they all in Sydney with you, or are they spread out around the world?
Spread out around the world. We've got some broadcast people in New Zealand, to a lot of them are in Dublin, in London. Everybody's everywhere. And it really, it's never mattered to me, again, from my Formula One background. I used to run my television team from Canada.
Oh, cool.
And they would, you know, they'd be traveling through Europe or through Asia or, you know, Pacific, wherever. So it's, you know, before it was a BlackBerry, now it's an iPhone. Sorry, Canada.
I miss my BlackBerry.
Me too. But, you know, it doesn't matter what time zone you're in, as long as you're allowing people to make decisions and measuring deliverables. You're good to go.
That is awesome. Where do you see the sport in the next 10 years? I know it's hard to say because there's different facets of the sport, different game, 7s, 15s, 10s, women's, men's, but if you're looking ahead 10 years from now, what do you want to see? Where do you want to see rugby's position in the world rankings of sports?
Yeah, I would hope to see it different parts of it, because as you said, it's still quite fragmented as far as what kind of rugby is available to play. I hope to see a very clear pathway for anybody who turns on the TV and looks at what they're seeing, loves it, and goes, I need to look that up. And they're able to find a way to the sport, whether it's as a fan, whether it's, you know, to play in it, whether it's putting their kid in it, or whether it's to, you know, join the administration of a union, a team, an international federation. I really hope to see a much more unified sport that has easy access and is super engaging to all audiences, where people are much more interested in it.
I think that's awesome. I've had many athletes on here, rugby players. I've had one ex-NHLer player on, and the common theme they all say is when you play rugby, you realize like this is the best team sport going. When I haven't played in a long time, I had to retire early with concussions and stuff like that. But to me, I still go back to that passion. Like I love going to watch my old club play. I love coaching because it keeps me involved in the game. How do we get that feeling of camaraderie and that feeling of such an amazing event across to those that have never played? That I'm assuming that's what you're working on when you say like we're trying to branch out. What are some of those messages you're pumping out there to try and convince people, give this a chance, even if you're a spectator, give it a chance?
Yeah, you've got the old goosebumps going on me here, because I'm absolutely with you on that. And I think on that level, it's campaign driven, especially off the back of COVID and coronavirus, where everybody's been sort of locked inside with their families. People have changed their values. They know what's important in life. And if we as a marketing team can reach them and show them how important rugby can be in their lives and how all those values that they've come to know over this very difficult period, actually, that's what rugby is. It's about coming together. It's about camaraderie. You know, I still have some of my greatest friends from school were from both high school and university. We're from the rugby team. And I learned in a rugby team, I learned respect. I learned leadership. I learned how to build something and do it together, as opposed to being over dramatic about something or picking on somebody because they failed at something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in rugby, traditionally we wear numbers. We don't wear names on our back. It's a team. It's really a team effort, and nobody's going to stand there and say, I won this game. There's no showboating. We're all together. And I think as a marketing, you know, as a chief marketing officer of World Rugby, if I can make that connection with the audience via campaigns that we can help the unions with, I think we'll reach a lot more people, because the message will resonate this go around if we get it right.
That's awesome. You make a great point. The team thing, like the numbers on the back, there's no names. There's a lot of younger players now in the international scene or professional scene that are trying to push for more individualism. Where do you think rugby stands on, like, what takes it too far? Like, I love watching, you know, NFL, and a guy celebrates with a nice dance, but you don't see that in rugby. And I'm very happy that you don't see that in rugby, but I enjoy seeing it in football. Is there a line? Like, what does World Rugby want there to try and promote interest, yet also stay in touch with the history and traditions of the game that a lot of people hold on to so fiercely?
It's a very fine balance, and I don't think there is a line. I think if we do this the right way, we will get there. But you mentioned it yourself, you know, an all-stars game, how we could, I guess first we have to hero our own players. If you put rugby stars in front of, you know, mainstream Canada, mainstream USA, even around the world, not a lot of people are going to recognize them. So as a federation with the unions, we have to start allowing those players to sort of come out of their shell, like the NBA does, like the NFL does, like the NHL does, so that people will recognize them, but not allow them to, you know, over commercialize themselves and become bigger than the sport. That's what rugby's about. Is no one player is bigger than the actual game itself, which is why we love it. And if it has to be any other way, I think a lot of people would step back. We attract a different audience, and I think that's good.
That's great. I think that's right. I mean, very rarely do you get somebody like a Wayne Gretzky or Muhammad Ali that come along and just dominate your sport and can be a face of it. In rugby, you've got, you know, 15 people or 7 people out there that even you could be the best player in the world, but you're still not going to stand out so much that, you know, maybe you're going to get recognized around the world, right? But I think that's great. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, Marissa?
In 10 years, well, not on a beach anywhere. I'm you know,
You're
I'm
on a
like
beach
my
now.
dad, like my mom. I'm just someone who loves to roll up my sleeves and get into something and really work. There's a CEO search for World Rugby going on now, and I wouldn't relinquish my role as chief marketing officer, because I think there's so much work to be done. But in 10 years, if I can become even greater an influence in the world of rugby, in the world of sport, then I would absolutely go for that. But for right now, this is the right role for me, and there's still a ton of work to be done. And for my chief financial officer, we're coming for more headcount. So beware, we're still wanting to grow before I leave.
So how do people apply for your jobs for these marketing positions?
Thanks for asking. World.rugby is probably the easiest place to go. And you'll see a career section and go on there and start applying for those positions.
I'll throw my resume out there. Just don't tell my current employers.
No worries. Don't send this to my chief financial officer.
There you go. Lastly, Marissa, is there any fun stories from your job, from your time playing sport, from your time working at a variety of sporting organizations? Just something that, you know, is lighthearted and think that, you know, everybody would get a kick out of this? I imagine there is, but you might not want to tell some of the stories too.
I mean, there's so many, just so many stories. I'm trying to think of one in particular. I mean, I have to say that probably the best one, and sorry to deviate from rugby, it has to go to Formula One, where I was working for Bernie Eccleston, who I'd always wanted to work for. And he offered me a job, and I had to turn him down at first because I wanted to finish the current job that I was working on. And everything notoriously in Formula One goes through him. And when I joined Formula One management, I was told to get a business card. I had to get him to sign off on a form. I was like, but I work here. Somebody please just get me business cards. They said, no, you have to sign off on a form. So I brought the form down to one of his secretaries. And she said, okay, I'll give this to Mr. Ecclestone. I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. It was a couple of days later, he comes up to me. He goes, what's this nonsense about you wanting business cards? I was like, well, I work here and when I meet people, he's like, who are you going to meet? So I'm trying to explain myself out of it, thinking, where is this going? And he said, you don't need a business card. There's no business cards. Nobody has business cards in this company. I thought, well, all right, fine. See you later. And what am I going to do? I'm not going to argue against that. And so I thought, gosh, I'm really trying to figure out the angle here on why he didn't want me to have business cards. And a week or so later, he walks by my desk and he looks at me, he goes, who are you? And I knew what he was doing. He was testing me. And I said, oh, sorry, I would tell you, but I don't have a business card. So you can have this one. And I picked one up from my desk and said, I met this guy. You could, call this guy. He knows who I am. And he laughed, not laughed, he chuckled and he walked away. And minutes later, the lady from design came over and said, Mr. Ecclestone says you need some business cards. So I figured it out. That was the way. That was the way through.
That was good. That's good. That was a good sense. It's nice to have a boss like that can, have fun and play at the same time. Like, it's serious. Like we need to know why, but still have a good joking manner about it too.
Dry humor.
It can be scary at times, can it?
Definitely.
All right, Marissa, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been a long time trying to get this on the books. I think I started contacting you, I'd say in September or October, maybe, to try and nail a date down. So you're busy, and I think that's great. And it's great for World Rugby, everything that you're doing there. So keep up the great work and look forward to all the success of Women's World Cup coming up and the Olympics as well. So.
And the Olympics and everything else, just getting rugby back up and running in the Northern Hemisphere. Thanks for your time and thanks for all that you do for rugby, especially in Canada, which
I do my best.
I hold very, very dear in my heart.
I love it. Well, cheers and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Jamie. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. That was a lot of fun, Marissa. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'm not sure how we managed to fit that in. Like you're living in Australia, working on Ireland time, chatting with me on the East Coast of Canada. Thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. Got a lot of knowledge and information from you and definitely got to hear about your passion for rugby and F1 and everything else. So thank you very much. Stay safe there in Australia and keep doing some wonderful things for the game of rugby. Coming soon, our next guests will be Stephanie and Hans de Goede. Stephanie and Hans are both captains of Canada back in the 80s and 90s and also proud parents of 3 kids, one including Sophie de Goede. We have Bobby Ross. Bobby and I chatted yesterday. That was a great conversation. Henry Paul and I are still trying to connect, as is Nick Blevins and I. And Rod Snow and I have made contact again, and we're going to be trying to set up our call here soon. Definitely have a host of others coming up, but we've got those 4 or 5 definitely that will be coming to you shortly. Lastly, just want to say thanks to everybody for listening. Keep spreading the good rugby word. Anything we can do here in Canada to help promote rugby in Canada, whether it's promoting our players or coaches or administration, programs, what have you, just keep doing what we can do. I got to say thanks to my 12-year-old Rylan for supplying us with our intro and outro music. As I've said a few times, he created that music digitally with his laptop, so that was pretty cool to have him join me on this little journey. As always, feel free to request topics for future podcasts, whether it's guests, whether it's thoughts about what should do, maybe it's a change in programming, what have you. Don't hesitate to reach out. And lastly, this is Jamie, and until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and most importantly, keep on rucking.